As they made their way back to Maple Ridge, the town was beginning to stir. The sun had fully risen, casting a warm light over the quiet streets. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another morning in a sleepy town, but John knew better. The world had changed. He had changed. When they reached the outskirts of town, John paused, glancing at Zira. She stood at his side, her silver hair catching the morning light, her skin shimmering faintly as if reflecting the dawn itself. She looked out of place here, like a star that had fallen from the sky. Yet somehow she fit. She belonged. "What now?" John asked, his voice softer now, the adrenaline finally ebbing from his system. Zira tilted her head, considering his question. For the first time since they met, there was no immediate danger, no life or death decision to make. It was a strange feeling, foreign and fragile. "I stay," she said finally, her voice carrying a quiet resolve. "This world, your people, you fought for me. I will fight for you." John felt a warmth loom in his chest, a mix of relief and something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. He nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "You're welcome here, Zira, for as long as you want." The days that followed were a blur of recovery and rebuilding. John and Zira worked together to clean up the remnants of the battle, carefully dismantling and hiding what alien technology remained. They couldn't risk the government, or worse, curious civilians, stumbling upon it and asking questions they weren't ready to answer. But beyond the cleanup, life began to settle into a new kind of normal. Zira adapted quickly, learning the ways of Earth with an eager curiosity that brought a rare lightness to their days. She marveled at the simplest things: running water, the warmth of the sun on her skin, the taste of fresh food. And in return, she shared pieces of her world with John, stories of distant galaxies, of civilizations long gone, of beauty and wonder far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between them deepened. It wasn't just about survival anymore. They were partners, friends, and perhaps something more. There were moments, quiet, unspoken moments, when their eyes met and the space between them felt charged with something electric. But neither of them rushed it. They had time now, and they both knew the importance of letting things unfold naturally. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, John and Zira sat on the porch of his cabin, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky. "Do you ever miss it?" John asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. "Your home." Zira was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse above them. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but sure. "I did," she admitted. "But now, this is home." John felt his heart swell at her words. He reached over, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. The warmth of her touch was grounding, a reminder that despite everything they had faced, they had found something rare, something worth holding on to. As the night deepened and the stars burned bright above them, John realized something profound. Humanity wasn't just about the people on this planet. It was about connection, about the bonds they formed, the love they shared, and the hope they carried into the unknown. And as long as they had that, they could face anything. The abandoned alien woman had found a new beginning on Earth, but so had John. Together, they were more than survivors. They were a testament to the resilience of life, the power of connection, and the unyielding spirit that defined them both. And as they sat side by side, staring into the infinite expanse of the universe, John knew one thing for certain: whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Ethan Cole ran through the collapsing corridors of Orion 7, his breaths ragged inside his cracked helmet. The emergency sirens wailed, red lights flashing as the station groaned under the pressure of whatever catastrophe had struck it. He didn't know what caused the explosion, only that the once thriving outpost orbiting the dead moon of Helios 4 was now a tomb. The metallic floor beneath him trembled, and in the distance, He could hear the screech of tearing metal as another section of the station gave way to the cold void. He needed to get to the last escape pod. His fingers danced across his wrist console, checking the oxygen levels in his suit. 15 minutes left. That was it. If he didn't get out now, it wouldn't matter what had caused this disaster. He'd suffocate before he could think about it. Behind him, the sound of something heavy moving through the wreckage sent a spike of fear through his chest. He wasn't alone. Someone, or something, was still here. He turned a corner, stepping over a body floating weightlessly in the corridor. His stomach churned at the sight. Harris, one of the engineers. His face was frozen in an expression of shock, his body eerily still in zero gravity. Ethan clenched his jaw, forcing himself to move on. He had to survive. He had to make it. The escape bay was just ahead. He pushed forward, his boots magnetizing to the floor with every hurried step. A deep, guttural sound echoed from the corridor behind him, a noise that wasn't human. Ethan's fingers tightened around the wrench strapped to his utility belt. He had no idea what was making that sound, and he wasn't about to find out. He rushed into the escape bay, his heart pounding. There it was, the last remaining pod, its doors open, waiting for him. Hope flared in his chest as he sprinted forward. Just a few more steps, and he'd be safe. Just a few more. The overhead lights flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows across the room. The moment he reached the pod's entrance, the temperature dropped. The air felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. And then, a shape moved in the darkness. A shadow, taller than any human, unfurled itself near the control panel. Two glowing blue eyes locked onto Ethan, freezing him in place. His fingers trembled over the emergency launch button, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but his body refused to move. The station trembled again, a loud creak shuddering through the walls. He had seconds to decide, face whatever was in front of him, or risk dying in the wreckage. Ethan took a breath and stepped forward. The figure did not move. The eyes watched him, unblinking, as if weighing his worth. Then, with a whisper like static, it spoke. "You are not meant to die here, human." The voice was like a song, layered with echoes. A shiver ran down his spine. Before he could react, the creature raised a hand. Light erupted from its palm, enveloping him in warmth. And then the world vanished. Darkness pressed against Ethan's eyelids, heavy and suffocating. He felt like he was sinking, weightless but trapped, as if the universe itself had swallowed him whole. Somewhere in the distance, a rhythmic thrum pulsed, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of something massive and alive. His mind clawed for consciousness, for memory. But all he could find was the lingering image of those glowing blue eyes and the strange voice that echoed in his skull. "You are not meant to die here, human." The words clung to him like a shadow as he drifted in and out of awareness. Then, a sharp jolt snapped him awake. Ethan gasped, his lungs burning as if he'd been holding his breath for hours. His eyes flew open, expecting to see the cold, metallic walls of the escape pod, or worse, the shattered remains of Oran 7. But what greeted him was something entirely different. He was lying on a smooth, translucent surface that seemed to glow faintly beneath him, casting soft light across the chamber. The walls around him pulsed with an otherworldly hue, shifting between deep blues and purples, as if the room itself were alive. The air was thick but breathable, carrying a faint scent of something floral, yet metallic. It wasn't the sterile, recycled oxygen of the space station. It was cleaner, fresher. His head spun as he sat up, wincing at the dull ache in his temples. The last thing he remembered was reaching the escape pod, and that figure with the glowing eyes. But this wasn't any place he recognized. A low hum vibrated beneath him, and he realized he wasn't just in a room. The entire structure felt like it was moving, gliding through space with a grace that defied the clunky mechanical feel of human ships. He was on a vessel, but not one made by human hands. Panic surged through him. He reached for his utility belt, but it was gone. His suit was still intact, but the tools, the wrench, everything he relied on for survival, had been stripped away. His pulse quickened as he scanned the room for an exit. Before he could stand, a soft hiss filled the chamber. A section of the wall slid open with a seamless, fluid motion, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, with skin that shimmered like polished silver under the soft light. Her hair floated around her head as if weightless, cascading in waves of deep indigo that seemed to absorb the light around her. But it was her eyes that held him captive. Glowing, luminescent pools of blue, the same eyes he had seen before. The alien. But this time, he could see her fully. She wore intricate armor that hugged her form, etched with symbols that pulsed faintly in rhythm with the ship's hum. Yet despite her imposing presence, there was something in her gaze that wasn't threatening. It was curious, almost gentle. "You are awake," she said, her voice the same melodic echo he had heard before. It wasn't just words. It was like the sound resonated in his bones, bypassing language barriers entirely. Ethan scrambled back, pressing himself against the cool wall behind him. Where am I?" His voice came out hoarse, his throat dry. The alien stepped closer, her movements graceful, almost floating. She tilted her head, as if studying him. "You are safe, human. This is my vessel." Ethan's mind raced. Safe? On an alien ship? He didn't feel safe. He felt trapped. "Why did you take me?" he demanded, trying to keep the fear from his voice. "What do you want?" The alien paused, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "I did not take you. I saved you." She knelt down to his level, her expression unreadable. "Your station was dying. You would have died with it." Ethan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. She wasn't wrong. He would have died. But that didn't explain why she cared. "Why me?" he whispered, more to himself than to her. For the first time, a flicker of something passed over her face. Regret. Sadness. It was hard to tell. "My name is Lyra," she said quietly, "Princess of the Xyrian Empire." Ethan blinked. A princess. His mind struggled to process this new information. Aliens existed. That much was clear. But royalty? What kind of empire was this? And why was a princess flying around saving humans? Before he could ask, Lyra stood and extended a hand toward him. "You are not my enemy, Ethan Cole." She said his name with surprising accuracy, as if she'd known it all along. "But saving you, it has made me one to my people." Ethan stared at her outstretched hand, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He didn't know if he could trust her, but one thing was certain. He had no choice. Wherever this was going, it was far from over. And somehow, he knew his life had just become part of something much bigger than he could ever imagine. Ethan didn't take her hand. Not immediately. His heart still hammered against his ribs, and his mind spun with questions he didn't know how to ask. But as he stared at Lyra, this alien princess who had plucked him from the jaws of death, he realized something unsettling. The fear in her glowing blue eyes wasn't directed at him. It was something else, something deeper. After a tense moment, he finally pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the ache in his legs. He didn't trust her. Not yet. But standing felt better than cowering on the floor like a helpless child. His eyes darted around the strange chamber again, trying to find something familiar, something human. But everything about this ship was alien. Smooth, seamless walls that pulsed with faint light, no visible doors or controls, and the constant, soothing hum that vibrated in his bones. This doesn't make sense," he muttered, running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. "Why would you save me? Why risk becoming a traitor to your people for someone like me?" Lyra's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She crossed her arms over her chest, her posture suddenly more guarded. "Because you are more important than you realize." Ethan scoffed. the sound harsh in the strange, quiet room. "I'm just a mechanic. I fix things. I don't know anything about aliens or empires or whatever mess you've dragged me into." Lyra stepped closer, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You think small, Ethan Cole. Your people, humans, have always underestimated themselves. But the Xyrian Empire doesn't." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He didn't like the sound of that. "What does your empire want with us?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra hesitated again, and that hesitation told Ethan more than her words ever could. "They see humans as a threat," she admitted finally. "Your resilience, your ability to survive against impossible odds, it unsettles them." Ethan frowned. The threat. Humanity was barely scraping by in the vastness of space. They had only colonized a few distant moons, built fragile stations like Orion 7. Compared to an empire that could build ships like this, humans were nothing. But Lyra's eyes told him she believed every word. Before he could press her further, the ship suddenly lurched, throwing Ethan off balance. He stumbled, catching himself against the glowing wall. The hum beneath his feet changed, growing sharper, more urgent. Lyra's calm demeanor vanished in an instant, replaced by something Ethan hadn't expected. Fear. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising sound. Ethan's stomach twisted. "Who?" Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and pressed her hand against the wall. The surface rippled beneath her touch, revealing a holographic projection of space outside the ship. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. 3 massive ships hovered in the distance, sleek and menacing, their surfaces bristling with weapons that glowed like molten metal. They were unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, dwarfing even the largest human battleships. Symbols, sharp and jagged, flashed across their hulls. Xyrian symbols, Ethan guessed. "They're here for me," Lyra said quietly. "And now, for you." Ethan's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. He was supposed to be dead on a crumbling space station, not caught in some intergalactic standoff with an alien empire. But as the Xyrian ships inched closer, their weapons charging with ominous light, the reality of his situation settled like a weight in his chest. "What do we do?" he asked, forcing the words past the lump in his throat. Lyra didn't hesitate. "We run." Before Ethan could protest, she pressed her palm against another section of the wall. The ship responded instantly, the hum beneath their feet shifting as the vessel prepared to move. But as they shot forward, trying to slip past the approaching warships, the largest of the Xyrian vessels fired. A beam of searing light streaked across the void, striking Lyra's ship with a force that sent Ethan sprawling. The walls groaned, the lights flickering as the ship struggled to stabilize. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his ears. "We're not gonna make it," he shouted over the rising noise. Lyra's eyes glowed brighter, her jaw clenched with determination. "Yes, we will." She moved to the control panel, her fingers dancing over the symbols with practiced ease. The ship responded, twisting and turning through space with impossible agility. But the Xyrian ships were relentless, closing in with terrifying speed. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't just stand here and watch. He was a mechanic. He fixed things. Maybe he couldn't fight an alien empire, but he could help keep this ship together. "Tell me what to do," he yelled, grabbing onto the edge of the control panel. Lyra glanced at him, surprise flickering across her face. But there was no time for questions. She nodded toward a nearby console, its surface flickering with warning symbols. "The shields are failing," she said. "If they go down, we're finished." Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He rushed to the console, his hands flying over the unfamiliar controls. The technology was alien, but the basics were the same. Circuits, power flow, energy management. He could do this. As he worked, the ship shuddered around him, the Xyrian warships pressing their attack. But slowly, bit by bit, Ethan stabilized the shields, rerouting power from non-essential systems, and patching the damaged circuits. "We're holding," he shouted, glancing back at Lyra. But Lyra wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the largest of the Zirian ships, her expression grim. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until we're both dead." Ethan's blood ran cold. He didn't know what Lyra had gotten him into, but one thing was clear: they were in this together now. And if they wanted to survive, they'd have to fight. Or die trying. The ship bucked violently under another barrage of Zirian fire, sending Ethan sprawling across the floor. Sparks rained from a ruptured panel above, the acrid scent of burning circuits filling the air. The hum beneath his feet had shifted from its soothing rhythm to a harsh, erratic vibration that rattled his teeth. He scrambled to his feet, his hands gripping the edge of the nearest console as he fought to stay upright. Lyra stood at the helm, her glowing eyes narrowed, fingers flying across the holographic controls with a precision Ethan could barely follow. Her calm demeanor from earlier had been replaced by a fierce determination, a cold fire burning beneath her composed exterior. This was no longer just a rescue mission. This was survival. "They're cutting off our escape routes," Lyra muttered, her voice tight with frustration. "They know this sector better than I do." Ethan's gaze darted to the holographic display hovering in front of her. 3 massive Zirian warships flanked their smaller vessel, herding them toward the dense asteroid field ahead. It was a trap. The only way out was through, but navigating that field at high speed was a death sentence. "They're trying to box us in," Ethan said, stating the obvious as his heart pounded in his chest. "What's the plan?" Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. "We make our own path." Before Ethan could ask what that meant, Lyra slammed her hand down on the console. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring to life with a deafening crescendo. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled toward the asteroid field, the Zirian ships hot on their tail. Ethan's stomach flipped as the ship plunged into the field, weaving between massive, spinning rocks with impossible agility. The inertial dampeners struggled to keep up, and Ethan felt every bone-jarring twist and turn as Lyra piloted them through the deadly maze. His fingers dug into the console, knuckles white, as he watched the holographic display flicker with warnings. "Are you sure about this?" he shouted over the roar of the engines. Lyra didn't look at him. "No." The ship banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a jagged asteroid the size of a small moon. Behind them, one of the Zirian warships wasn't so lucky. It clipped the edge of an asteroid, the collision sending it spiraling into another rock with a brilliant explosion. Ethan allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it was short-lived. The other 2 ships were still on their tail, and they were learning from their comrade's mistake. "They're adapting," Ethan said, his mind racing. "They're not going to crash like the first one." Lyra's jaw clenched. "Then we'll have to be faster." Ethan's eyes darted to the console in front of him, scanning the unfamiliar symbols and readouts. The ship was fast, but it wasn't fast enough. Not against Zirian technology. But maybe speed wasn't the only answer. "I can reroute more power to the engines," he said, his mind working through the possibilities. "But we'll have to drop the shields." Lyra's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Without the shields, we won't survive a direct hit. And with them, we won't outrun them," Ethan shot back. "It's a gamble, but it's the only shot we've got." Lyra hesitated, her gaze flicking between Ethan and the holographic display. The Zirian ships were closing in, their weapons glowing with ominous light. There was no time to debate. "Do it," she ordered. Ethan didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the console, bypassing safety protocols and rerouting power from the shields to the engines. The ship shuddered beneath him, the hum of the engines rising to a deafening roar as they surged forward. The stars outside became streaks of light once more, and for a brief, heart-pounding moment, Ethan thought they might actually make it. But the Zirian ships weren't giving up without a fight. A warning alarm blared as a beam of searing energy grazed the side of their ship, sending them spiraling out of control. Ethan was thrown against the console, pain flaring in his ribs as the ship spun wildly through the asteroid field. Lyra fought to regain control, her fingers moving with desperate precision as she stabilized their trajectory. "We're losing structural integrity," Ethan shouted, his eyes darting to the damage reports flooding the console. "We can't take another hit like that." Lyra's eyes blazed with determination. "We won't." With a final bone-jarring twist, she guided the ship through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The Xerian ships followed, but they were too large, too unwieldy to navigate the tight space. The lead ship clipped the edge of an asteroid, its hull crumpling under the impact. The second ship tried to pull back, but it was too late. The explosion from the first ship sent a shockwave through the field, tearing the second ship apart in a brilliant cascade of fire and debris. Ethan stared in stunned silence as the holographic display cleared, showing nothing but empty space behind them. They had escaped. For now. The ship limped forward, its engines sputtering as they left the asteroid field behind. Ethan collapsed into the nearest seat, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. Every muscle in his body ached, and his mind was a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. Lyra sank into the pilot's chair, her glowing eyes dimming as the immediate danger passed. But the tension in her shoulders remained, a silent reminder that their ordeal was far from over. "They'll send more," Ethan said quietly, his voice hoarse. Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the empty expanse of space ahead. "Yes, they won't stop until they have us." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of their situation settling over him like a shroud. He had escaped death on Orion 7, but he wasn't free. He was a fugitive now, hunted by an empire he didn't understand, alongside an alien princess with secrets of her own. But as he looked at Lyra, he saw something more than fear in her eyes. He saw resolve, determination, and maybe, just maybe, he saw hope. "We need a plan," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. Lyra turned to him, her expression hardening. "Then we make one." And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan believed they just might have a chance. The aftermath of their narrow escape hung in the air like static, thick and oppressive. The Xerian warships were gone, reduced to drifting wreckage in the asteroid field, but the silence that followed was far from comforting. Ethan sat slumped against the cool, glowing wall of the alien ship's control room, his breath still ragged, the adrenaline slowly draining from his system. Every muscle in his body ached from the constant tension, but his mind refused to rest. Lyra stood at the central console, her glowing blue eyes scanning the holographic projections floating around her. The soft hum of the ship had returned, but it no longer felt soothing. It felt like a countdown, a reminder that their respite was temporary. The damage to the vessel was severe. Ethan could see the fractures along the sleek walls, the flickering lights that once pulsed rhythmically now struggling to maintain their glow. The ship was alive, but barely. Ethan forced himself to his feet, the pain in his ribs sharp but manageable. He crossed the room, stopping beside Lyra. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their situation pressed down on them both, unspoken but undeniable. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Lyra's jaw tightened, her fingers pausing over the controls. "No," she said quietly. "They'll keep coming. The Xerian Empire doesn't tolerate betrayal." Ethan let out a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. "Betrayal? I'm just a mechanic. What did I do to deserve being hunted by an empire?" Lyra turned to him then, her expression unreadable. "It's not just about you, Ethan. It's what you represent." She hesitated, as if weighing her words. Humanity has always been underestimated, but the Xerian Council sees the potential. They fear it. Ethan frowned, his mind struggling to grasp the enormity of her words. Humanity was barely surviving in the vastness of space, scraping by on fragile colonies and aging space stations. The idea that they could be seen as a threat to an empire like the Xyrians was absurd. But Lyra's eyes told him she believed every word. Before he could respond, a soft chime echoed through the control room. Lyra's gaze snapped back to the console, her fingers flying across the controls. The holographic display shifted, revealing a blinking symbol that pulsed ominously. "They've sent a transmission," she said, her voice low. Ethan's stomach twisted. "From who?" "The Xyrians." Lyra nodded. "The Council." Ethan swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do they want?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she pressed a symbol on the console, and the holographic display expanded, revealing a figure cloaked in shadows. The voice that followed was cold, mechanical, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Princess Lyra of the Xyrian Empire," the voice intoned. "You have violated the sacred laws of the Council. Harboring a human fugitive is an act of treason. Surrender the human, and your life will be spared. Resist, and you will be hunted to the ends of the galaxy." The transmission ended, the voice fading into the oppressive silence that followed. Ethan felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. He turned to Lyra, searching her face for any hint of reassurance, but found none. Her expression was grim, her glowing eyes hard as steel. "They're giving you a choice," Ethan said quietly. "Turn me in, and you live." Lyra's gaze snapped to his, her eyes blazing with something fierce and unyielding. "There is no choice," she said, her voice sharp. "I won't betray you." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't understand why she was willing to risk everything for him, a stranger from a dying space station. But he saw the conviction in her eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But that hope was fragile, and it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of their situation. "They're going to keep coming," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "We can't keep running forever." Lyra nodded, her expression hardening. "Then we fight." Ethan stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "Fight? Against an entire empire? With what? This ship is barely holding together, and I'm just a mechanic." Lyra's lips curled into a faint, determined smile. "You're more than that, Ethan. You just don't know it yet." Before he could ask what she meant, Lyra turned back to the console, her fingers moving with purpose. The holographic display shifted again, revealing a star map that pulsed with glowing symbols. "There's a place," she said, her eyes fixed on the map. "A hidden outpost on the edge of Xyrian space. It's where the resistance gathers." Ethan's eyebrows shot up. "Resistance?" Lyra nodded. "Not everyone in the Empire agrees with the Council. There are those who believe in unity, in peace between our species. But they're scattered, hiding in the shadows." She pointed to a distant star on the map. "This is where we'll find them." Ethan stared at the map, the weight of their mission settling over him. They were fugitives, hunted by an empire, with only a sliver of hope to guide them. But he saw the fire in Lyra's eyes, the unyielding determination that refused to be extinguished. And he realized he had that fire too. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Let's find them." Lyra nodded, a spark of approval in her glowing eyes. "We will. But be ready, Ethan. The road ahead won't be easy." Ethan let out a breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "I wasn't expecting easy." As Lyra plotted their course, Ethan moved to the damaged consoles, his mechanic's mind already working through the repairs they'd need to survive the journey. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. The journey to the hidden outpost was anything but smooth. The ship groaned under its own weight, its hull scarred from the Xyrian attack, and the constant flicker of damaged systems painted the walls in an eerie pulsing light. Ethan spent every waking moment crawling through the cramped maintenance shafts, patching leaks, rerouting power, and praying the ship would hold together long enough to reach their destination. His hands were raw from handling alien tools that didn't quite fit human fingers, and his muscles ached from contorting into impossible angles just to reach vital components. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Lyra piloted the vessel with unflinching precision, her glowing eyes scanning the stars ahead as if searching for threats hidden in the dark. She barely spoke, and when she did, her words were clipped, focused entirely on survival. Ethan could see the tension in her posture, the weight of their situation pressing down on her like a physical force. She was a princess on the run from her own people, a traitor to an empire that would stop at nothing to see her captured or worse. But despite the silence, an unspoken bond grew between them. They were both outcasts now, fugitives bound together by a shared fight against impossible odds. Ethan didn't trust easily, but he found himself relying on Lyra more with each passing day. And in the rare moments when their eyes met across the dimly lit control room, he saw a flicker of that same trust reflected back at him. After days of tense, silent travel, they finally approached the outpost, a hidden station nestled within the gravitational pull of a dying star. The outpost was invisible to the naked eye, shielded by layers of cloaking technology that even Lyra had trouble detecting. It wasn't until they were almost on top of it that the hidden docking bay revealed itself, opening like the jaws of some great, sleeping beast. As they docked, Ethan felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, their chance to find allies, to regroup and fight back against the Xyrian Empire. But as the airlock hissed open, and they stepped into the dim, flickering corridors of the outpost, Ethan felt a prickle of unease crawl down his spine. The station was eerily quiet, the only sound the echo of their footsteps against the metal floor. The walls were scared and pitted, signs of old battles and hasty repairs. It didn't feel like a refuge. It felt like a grave. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Lyra didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the corridor, her hand resting on the strange, glowing weapon at her hip. Finally, she nodded. "This is it, but something's wrong." They moved cautiously through the station, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with possibilities. Had the Xyrian Empire found the outpost before them? Were they walking into a trap? As they rounded a corner, the answer came in the form of a shadow moving in the darkness ahead. Ethan froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the wrench strapped to his belt. The only weapon he trusted. Lyra raised her own weapon, the soft glow of its energy casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. "Who's there?" Lyra called out, her voice steady. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a figure stepped into the dim light, their features obscured by a battered helmet. The figure raised their hand slowly, a universal sign of peace. "We're not here to fight," the figure said, their voice crackling through an old, malfunctioning translator. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra, his grip tightening on the wrench. He didn't trust this stranger, not after everything they'd been through. But Lyra lowered her weapon slightly, her glowing eyes narrowing as she studied the figure. "Who are you?" she demanded. The figure removed their helmet, revealing a face that was both human and alien. Faintly glowing tattoos marked their skin, and their eyes had the faint luminescence Ethan now recognized as Xyrian. But the lines of exhaustion and determination on their face were unmistakably human. "My name is Kel," the figure said. "I lead the resistance." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. They'd found the resistance, but what kind of resistance had humans and Xyrians fighting side by side? Kale led them deeper into the station, through winding corridors and hidden passageways that seemed to shift and change with every step. Ethan kept his guard up, his eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the outpost, he began to see signs of life. Hushed voices, the faint hum of machinery, and the unmistakable sound of hope being forged in the darkness. The resistance was real. Kale brought them to a large chamber at the center of the station, where a ragtag group of humans and Xyrians worked side by side, repairing ships, analyzing data, and planning their next move. The air was thick with tension, but also with purpose. These were people who had lost everything to the Xyrian Empire, and who were willing to fight to get it back. Lyra stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. Conversations halted, and all eyes turned to her. There was a moment of tense silence. Then Kale spoke. "This is Princess Lyra," he announced, "and the human she saved." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Ethan felt the weight of their stares, but he stood his ground. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was part of something bigger now. Lyra raised her chin, her voice steady and clear. "The Xyrian Empire will not stop until they control every corner of the galaxy. But they fear humanity's resilience. They fear what we can accomplish together." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. "They fear us." A charged silence followed her words. Then, slowly, one by one, the members of the resistance began to nod. The tension in the room shifted, replaced by a growing sense of unity. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. Later that night, as he worked on repairing one of the Resistance's battered ships, he found his answer. A message hidden deep within the ship's communication system. A message from the Xyrian Council. "Deliver the human alive, and you will be spared." Ethan's blood ran cold. He turned, searching for Lyra in the dimly lit hangar. When he found her, their eyes met, and in that moment, he knew. She hadn't told him everything, and the real battle was only just beginning. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the message glowing on the cracked console screen. The words echoed in his mind, each one sinking like a stone into his gut. "Deliver the human alive, and you will be spared." The message was clear. The Xyrian Empire didn't just want him dead. They wanted him captured. And Lyra, the one person he thought he could trust, had known all along. He stood there for a long moment, his mind spinning. Every conversation, every glance they'd shared replayed in his head. But now it all felt different. The weight of betrayal settled over him like a heavy blanket, suffocating and cold. Had Lyra really planned to turn him over from the start? Was everything she'd done just a calculated move to use him as a bargaining chip? But then Ethan remembered the fear in her eyes when they first met, the fierce determination in her voice when she said she wouldn't betray him. It didn't add up. She had risked everything to save him. Her title, her people, even her life. That kind of sacrifice didn't come from someone looking to make a deal. No, something else was going on. Ethan closed the console, his jaw tight. If there was one thing he'd learned from his years working on space stations, it was that things were rarely as simple as they seemed. And he wasn't about to jump to conclusions now. But he needed answers. He found Lyra in the outpost's command center, standing alone before a massive holographic star map. The soft blue light illuminated her silver skin, casting sharp shadows across her face. She didn't hear him approach, too lost in thought to notice his presence. "Lyra," Ethan called out, his voice flat and steady. She turned, and for a brief second, relief flickered across her face. But when she saw the look in his eyes, that relief vanished, replaced by something colder, wariness. "We need to talk," Ethan said, holding her gaze. Lyra nodded slowly, sensing the shift in his tone. She motioned for him to follow her into a smaller, more private room off the main corridor. The door hissed shut behind them, sealing them in a space that felt too small, too quiet. Ethan wasted no time. He crossed his arms, staring her down. "I found a message in the ship's system," he said, his voice low. "From the Xyrian Council. They want me alive. And they offered to spare you if you deliver me." Lyra's face remained unreadable, but her eyes softened slightly, like she'd been expecting this confrontation. She didn't deny it. Instead, she let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing just a little. "I knew you'd find it," she said quietly, "but it's not what you think." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it? You saved me, risked your life to protect me. But the whole time, you knew they wanted me alive. You knew they'd offer you a way out. Lyra stepped forward, her glowing eyes locked on his. Yes, I knew, she admitted, her voice steady. But I never planned to take it. Ethan wanted to believe her. He really did. But the gnawing doubt in his chest refused to let go. Why? He asked, his voice softer now. Why would you risk everything for me? I'm just a mechanic. I'm nobody. Lyra's eyes searched his face, as if trying to find the right words. When she spoke, her voice was filled with something Ethan hadn't expected. Pain. Because you're not nobody, Ethan, she said. You're the key. Ethan blinked, confusion washing over him. The key? To what? Lyra turned away, her gaze drifting to the small window that looked out into the endless expanse of space. The Xyrian Empire has always feared humanity, she began, her voice distant. But it's not just your resilience they fear, it's what's inside you. Your DNA. Ethan's mind reeled. My DNA. Lyra nodded. The Xyrian Council discovered something years ago. An anomaly in human genetics. A mutation that gives your species the potential to resist their influence, their control. It's rare, but when it appears, she trailed off, her eyes meeting his again. It makes you dangerous to them. Ethan felt the floor shift beneath him, as if the very foundation of his world had cracked. He wasn't just a random target. He was a threat. A walking weapon against an empire that thrived on domination. They want to study you, Lyra continued, to find a way to suppress that mutation. If they succeed, humanity will never be free from their grasp. The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a crushing force. All his life, he'd felt small, insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But now he realized just how wrong he'd been. He wasn't just part of this fight. He was the fight. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. So what do we do? Lyra's eyes sparkled with determination. We fight back. We expose the truth to the galaxy. The Resistance has been gathering evidence of the Xyrian Empire's atrocities, but they needed something more, something undeniable. You're that proof, Ethan. The pieces fell into place in his mind. The escape from Orion 7, the relentless pursuit, the message from the Council. It all led to this moment. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a mechanic scrambling to survive. He felt like a warrior standing on the edge of a battlefield. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and steady. You're stronger than you think, Ethan, and you're not alone. Ethan nodded, the fear in his chest replaced by a burning resolve. They had one chance to turn the tide, to show the galaxy that humanity wouldn't be broken. The plan came together quickly. They would broadcast a message from the outpost, using its powerful communication array to reach every corner of the galaxy. Ethan's DNA, combined with the Resistance's evidence, would ignite a rebellion against the Xyrian Empire. But the Council wouldn't let them do it without a fight. As they prepared the transmission, the outpost's alarms blared to life. The Xyrian fleet had found them. Ethan and Lyra rushed to the command center, where Kale and the rest of the Resistance were already gearing up for battle. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was no fear, only determination. We hold them off as long as we can, Kale said, his voice firm. Ethan, you and Lyra get that message out. The galaxy needs to hear the truth. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding as he and Lyra sprinted to the communications array. The walls trembled under the force of Xyrian fire, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Reaching the control room, Ethan activated the array, his fingers flying over the controls. Lyra uploaded the evidence, and together, they prepared the final piece, Ethan's DNA. The door behind them exploded inward, Xyrian soldiers flooding into the room. But Lyra was faster. She raised her weapon, a beam of searing light cutting through the enemy ranks. Ethan focused on the console, his hand steady even as chaos erupted around him. With a final keystroke, the transmission began. The message spread across the galaxy, reaching every colony, every outpost, every hidden corner where hope still lingered. The truth was out. The Xyrian Empire's reign of terror was over. As the last of the Xyrian soldiers fell, Ithan and Lyra stood side by side, their breaths heavy but triumphant. The battle wasn't over, not yet, but the spark had been lit, and humanity would rise. Together,